Welcome to your tutorial on building online surveys. First, we'll do an overview of the Qualtrics online environment. All right, so you can access the Qualtrics login page either through the main website and clicking on the free access, at which point you'd create a username and password. Or if you happen to belong to an organization that has created their own login for Qualtrics, you would access that through their specific web address. So the University of Ottawa has one that looks like this. And so if you're accessing it through the one provided to you from the course, you would enter the course code at this fake email address and then the password that was provided to you. So once you log in, if you've never logged in before, it's going to look something like this. And you have the option to create a new project. But if you've logged in before and have already created a project, you'll actually just log into a page that has all the projects listed. And then you can also have the option to create a new one at that point. So if you click on new project, it's going to open up this page and give you a few different options. But what you want to do is actually just click on survey and it'll let you enter a name for it. So let's say I'm just going to call this one fake 123. For the purposes of your course, if you could just put your student number, that would be great. And then basically, you also have the option when you're creating a new survey to either make one from a copy of another one from a library. So this would be one that you is available online or through another user, or you can actually export your own file and then import it that way. But basically, we're going to start with a blank new one. So then you click on Get Started. And essentially, it opens the survey window where this is kind of the main user interface. So you can see up here, it has the survey name. If you click, you can see other ones that you have as well. And then that lets you kind of switch between surveys. But for now, we're in this fake one that's called Fake 123. Generally speaking, you would want to name this in a way that users would find that it makes sense for whatever study they're doing. So normally you would give it like a real name. Like if this was a study about sports, you'd call it like sports study or something like that. So when you're building your survey, you want to be in the survey tab, but you also have the option to kind of click between and look at actions. And so this is something that we won't be using, but you can add different kind of tasks or things that your survey would do. Distributions is how you actually share your survey. So you have options to create kind of web, like pre-made emails. You can get a single link that you give to everyone, or you can generate trackable links for each participant. So this might be if you're trying to kind of keep track of who's completed a survey and who hasn't. There's ethical implications for that if you're doing a study kind of through a university, but you get the idea. You can also get an anonymous link to use and embed on your website. There's options for using social media posting, and then you can make a QR code, etc., or an online panel, which would be where you get a group of people online through a different platform. So for now, you can just click on kind of getting that single reusable link. Then you have the option to export your data. So once someone has completed the survey, there will be options to export it that way. And then finally, you can actually create online reports. Personally, I don't like this. I find it's easier just to export the data. But if you want to look quickly to see kind of at one specific question, how people are answering, that you would do that through here. But anyway, most of the work we'll be doing is in the survey platform. And in that, you can actually change kind of the look and feel of it. So you can make your survey look, you can change like the background. You can change how questions appear. You can change like what the little buttons look like to progress through different pages. You can decide if you want to have a progress bar at the bottom so people can see how far they are and where things are positioned. You can change the colors. You can change the font. You can change the size. You can also change like whether you want to add page transitions or if you want it to advance to questions moving forward, you can add like a logo at the top, and you can also change the background. And if you play with it and don't like it, you can just also restore the defaults. So personally, I find that the Qualtrics defaults look pretty good, so I tend not to play with them, but also an option if you wanted to make it look branded. And then it also lets you kind of look between what it would look like on a web browser and what it looks like on mobile. So you have both options. And then in terms of the flow, this is where you can like block certain questions together, and then people can kind of skip sections depending on characteristics or what you need in your survey. Here you can set the default options in terms of, like who can have access, can people go back and forth, can they change their answers, when, how does the survey end, etc. And then finally in tools, you can just add some kind of defaults to kind of reset values. You can auto number questions. You can have certain quotas, which means if like you only wanted a certain number of men or a certain number of women to complete it, you could. And then most interestingly here, you can also translate your survey. So if you click this option, it'll actually let you kind of translate each question by question, and it'll even keep track of whether or not you've completed it. So this is very handy. All right, so that kind of covers an overview of the Qualtrics interface. Now we'll look at setting up and building consent forms in Qualtrics. Okay, so for the example we're going to walk through today, we are going to put this survey here from my PhD research into Qualtrics. So it's actually just a really short version. So we can see here we have a consent form, and then we have a few demographic questions and one Likert type scale question. So the first thing we need to do is add our consent form. So what I want to do is copy this, and then I need to go to my survey page. And the first thing I need to do is I want to create a block here so that the consent form appears in its own block. And then I need to change this. So if I click on this, it lets me change the question type, and I need to make this a descriptive text. And what I'm going to do basically is just copy and paste that directly in there. So now suddenly I have this big text box, and if I click next to it, it kind of makes it look nice. And I can also click on Rich Content Editor if I want to, I don't know, make these bold, change the text size. Like this lets you actually kind of do some of that more fancy editing. If you happen to be familiar with HTML coding, you can actually just do that directly into the original editor here. Like you could just put if you want, but if not, there's the option to click that way as well. So one of the issues with asking for consent is that we need people online to actually provide their consent before they continue with their survey. So we're actually going to copy this last little part here and make it its own question. So you need to make a new question here. And if you click there, you can actually just paste it directly in as well. And then we need the answers to be yes, or we don't want maybe, so we're going to remove that one, or no. So what we need is to make this question required so people can't skip it. So we can do that by clicking over here, validation options, click force response. And then we need to add skip logic. So to do that, we click here. So if you click on the little gear, add skip logic. And basically what happens is we need to set the condition. So if this question is answered no, we want to skip to the end of the survey. So what this means is that anyone who doesn't, so this question is now required because we put force question. And if they click the yes, they'll have access to the next questions. If they click no, it's going to automatically go to the end of the survey. So the next thing we want to do is just make sure that we actually name our questions properly here. And this is going to be relevant for when we export the data. So if you click here, consent form, we can name it that way. And you have to use the same naming conventions as SPSS. So no special characters, no spaces, can't start with a number. And then here we would put consent yes, no. And this is the key one. If they consent, they can have access to the next page. Next, we'll look at adding questions. So now we're in a new block. And essentially a block kind of serves as like a new page and a new section of questions. So it's easy to skip that block if they're all kind of in the same one. So what we want to do now is we need to start adding our next question. So we kind of have our demographic information section. So one thing that we would do here is we create new question. And if we want to put a heading, we would put descriptive text, and I can put, that demographic information. And if I want to make that look really big, I can go here and let's specify that it's going to be size 16 font. And then the next thing I need is a place where people can put their first name. So again, I click a new question. And this time I need to go and find the one that lets people enter text. So you can see here out of the standard question list, there's the option to enter text. There's also the more advanced question options here to kind of add like heat maps and more advanced things. Some of these might not be available in the free version. And then finally the really advanced ones where people can upload questions or we can time something, etc. So basically we're going to be looking here in text entry and literally just going to copy it. And you don't need to copy the little number here. It's going to number things automatically and call that your first name. So again, we want to get in the habit here of naming Q4 something relevant, and I can just put this as heading 1, and then that way in the data set I know what it is. You can also call it demographic information, it doesn't matter. So here you can also, for the text questions, you can put certain you can put certain restrictions on it. So you can say that it's a single line or a multi-line. It makes it bigger. An essay just gives people more space if they want to. You can decide how big the little box is. But you can also set it as a password, but for now we'll keep it as a single line. And you can also put that like there's a certain length, maximum length of characters they can add. You can also do content validation where it has to be an email address or it has to be a number or it has to be a text. So in this case, we'll say since it's first name that it has to be text. Okay, so you can kind of put those specifications. All right, our next question is we're asking people their gender. So again, same thing, but this time the default usually goes to a multiple choice question. And in this case, they already know that we want that question. So again, we'll call this one gender, and it prompted this, but we do want to add an extra category. So to add an extra one, if it only has 2, if you click in one and just click enter, it gives you the third option. So prefer not to disclose. And then something with multiple choice questions is you have to make sure that the answers you're getting correspond to those codes that we want in SPSS. So if you recall, we want to assign, like 0, 1, 2, or 2, or 1, 2, 3, or something. So to do that, you would click on, you'd click here, and you would actually go to recode values. So what this does is it opens up the option and shows you what they're already at. And so this means that we can see that they're already set to 1, 2, and 3. But if I want to change it to 0, 1, and 2, you could do it that way. So it's always good to check because sometimes it's not going to get it right, and that can be obnoxious. So we have gender, and then we ask them, we want their birthday. So we create another question. This one we call, your birthday. And there was an option, if you recall, we saw it with the text entry to make it that they have to specify a date. So we can go content validation and we can ask it for a date, and we want day, month, year. And essentially it means it's going to be looking for something that looks like this. And so participants have to enter, 02, 10, and whatever year, based on setting it like that. So again, this one we call it, birthday. All right, so that kind of gives you how to set up the demographic variables. So these ones here are I'm going to skip the kind of sport experience because it's kind of the same thing as this. So this one you would do, what is your primary sport? You'd put it in the same way as your birthday. How many competitive years have you done in this sport? So that one's looking for a number. So you'd set it up with a text entry, but force it to be a number. Same thing with this one and same thing with this one. So you would put those in as text-based questions, but with a forced number. So when it comes to entering Likert type scales, what you need to do is actually enter one of the multiple choice matrix questions. So what we do here is create a new question. We go up here, and this time we don't want just a plain multiple choice question. We want a matrix one. So what it does is creates this kind of big thing here, and you can see it's missing information, but you get the idea. So in this case, I'm going to copy the actual question here. So it's like your coach. So for this section, we are interested in knowing about your interactions with your coach. Using the scale below, please indicate the extent to which you agree with the following statements, blah, blah, blah. So paste that in here. Again, you can you can edit what it looks like if you'd want. So we'll call this one overall, we're going to call it coach. So the first problem we have is that we don't have, we're missing this little thing. So my coach, ... So we need to adjust this so that there's 7 points because our Likert scale it's a 1 to 7 from do not agree to completely agree. And then we have 16 questions. So sometimes you can get lucky and actually just copy paste this directly in. Oh, and look at that, it worked. All right, if not, you can do them one by one. If you want to delete one, you would just click here and then remove statement. To add another one, if you recall, click in the last one, click enter, and then it brought it back. And then on this side, we want these to associate with, 1, 2, 3. So once you do 1, 2, 3, if you click enter again in the last one, it's going to start adding them 6, 7 there. But we're missing the anchors. So here we want to specify that this is do not agree and that the 4 is somewhat agree and that the last one is completely agree. All right, so now we have those 3. And if actually we click on preview here, we can see what it looks like so far. So as you can see, we start with our consent form, we get to the bottom and people say no, and then automatically it goes to the end of the survey. So let's restart. So that's working. We probably should have tested that before, but that's fine. So this time we're going to say yes. And now we'll see that we have access to the questions. So people can enter their name. I'll put my name. And then they pick their gender, and then the birthday. So it has to be a format, like that. So it's fine. If you try to enter something different, it should get angry. Okay, it might get angry when you click at the end, but it should be that format there. And then this section, it looks like I've added a little tab there. But anyway, it's asking about your coach. And then we can see that this has appeared the way we want it to. So people can answer kind of different questions depending on what they feel. I'm obviously just entering randomly. And then you click next, and then the survey is done. So the only thing we need to make sure here is that we have actually set this up properly so that these values associate with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and not these text agreements, and that these have a name. So again, to do that, we're going into the recode values. And this time we have a few different options. So we can make sure the values worked. So this just want to check and make sure that was good. By entering it the way I did, where I put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 first, and then added these labels after, it usually means it'll do this by default. Whereas if you do it the other way, you usually do have to fix this. We can also change the question export tags. So what this does is make sure that in SPSS, these variables are named properly. So the default is it's going to take coach and add these numbers, but sometimes it doesn't work depending on what order you do things in. So you would want to set this up manually, where you'd be like making sure that this one is coach 1, coach 2, coach 3. But now we know that these correspond. And then the variable naming, This is how it's going to appear in the text version in SPSS. So if you like to keep these so you remember, it's good. But if not, you can actually just remove them here as well. And that's totally personal preference. So the pink row, it doesn't actually matter, but I'm gonna leave them. So things to make sure is that yellow is actually numbers and that the question export tags correspond to variable names that make sense to you. So we can click close. And then the final thing is the survey termination options. So when we look here, we can leave the default, or you can add a custom one. And you can kind of load a pre-existing like saved message, or you can redirect to a different website. So if you wanted to, I could send people at the end just to Google if I wanted. Okay, like up to you, but I'll just leave the custom one. And so if you wanted to, and if a survey is no longer working, you can also it'll automatically just say the survey is not available, but you can also put a custom message as well. So this might be relevant if you're putting a survey out on behalf of a brand or a company and you want to make sure that you kind of always have your best foot forward and not just, it doesn't look like an error message. So anyway, once we're here though, the survey is set up, and another option, depending on how you want things to look, you can add a page break. So perhaps maybe after the birthday question, we wanted to have this appear on a new page. Some people prefer that, especially if they're going to be browsing on mobile. So if we look at it now, we'll see that we get, if we click yes here, okay, we can see that these questions appear on their own page, and then we click next, and then this is on its own page, and then we go to the end of the survey that way. So again, kind of your preference. Typically, people tend to prefer shorter pages and less questions per page. Okay, so that's how you build a question. I guess I'll just also quickly show you if we wanted to add a, let's say like a ranked question where people indicate their preference. Oh, and I also didn't show you, sorry. If you want to add questions and you're not just adding to the bottom, you could add a question above it here by just adding that, or below it, like by clicking on this side. And if you want to get rid of it, you just click on that. So then it's gone. But here, I'll add a ranked choice one too. So rank order questions. So please pick your favorite. So we could put like, I don't know, cat, dog, horse. And there's some options in here. I'll call this one animal. So generally speaking, actually never mind about the options. So once you click preview, so this one's pretty neat because it lets people drag and drop, which is kind of fun from a user perspective. But what they do is, if you want to you can change the order that way. So once you click on it, I don't know, I think it's kind of fun. But these questions are not necessarily easy to use. All right. Okay, so that is how you upload or create some questions. Finally, we'll look at how to collect and export data. All right, so once your data or your survey is built and you've previewed it and it looks good, what you want to do is click on publish. So what this does is makes your survey available. And what's nice about Qualtrics is it has a built-in mechanism for actually testing the quality of your survey. So it's making some recommendations to us. And it's saying that that there's some opportunities to optimize this from mobile. And that some of our questions are not accessible for anyone with who might have like a physical disability or something that'll make this less accessible to them. So this is where it's like kind of not liking the ranked order question. And it's saying on this one that it's too long for the Likert type scale, but unfortunately, it's more with the Likert questions, like the only other option is to kind of break it in half, or to ask each one as its own separate multiple choice question, which is also an option. So I can show you what that would look like. So if you don't want to set it up this way, another option would be to add a new question and make it so, like, I don't know, does not care about me. So my coach does not care about me. And then have the options like 1, do not agree, 2, 3, 4, somewhat agree, 5, 6, 7, oops. Okay, and then again, same thing here. I'll call this one coach, I don't care. And in this case, you can also, you can make it appear horizontal, so it looks like that. There's other options to have like columns, but anyway, in this case, you would be there. And essentially, again, the same thing, you want to make sure that the values correspond with what you want. So in this case, we're good. And the variable naming wouldn't be relevant because there's only the one. So that's also an option, and this would appear better on mobile, but it's up to you, really, personal preference. All right, so once it's all set up, you would click publish, and automatically this becomes, you can name it something or just use your published version and leave it blank. And now we have basically a link that we can click on, and that you can use this link to get data. So if we click on this, we're now filling this out as a participant. So we click yes, next, and then I'm going to put my name in, and we can do this, and let's say I'm going to do it that way, and then I can put my birthday, but I'll just skip that, that's fine. And then I need to answer some questions. I'm answering randomly. Please don't actually do this if you're ever participating in a survey. This is just for demonstration purposes. And then I click next, and we're done. So I close that. So then on the user end, what you would do if you want to actually see your data is you would click on data analysis and then export, and you click export data, and you can see that you have a bunch of different options in what format you export it in. So this would bring it into just a data sheet. This would be Excel. You can do Google Drive, or you can click on SPSS and just leave the default of download all files. There's some options about kind of like how it exports, but basically it's easier just to leave it as the default. Click download. All right, and then once we click download here, so it's going to create a zip file. We click open. All right, here we are. So it's unzipped it. I click in here. Okay, not sure what this is. Don't worry about that. But as you can see here, we have the data, and the first thing it does is gives us a whole bunch of information about start date, end date, IP address, how long it took them to do, and then basically, and the user language. So in our case, we only had one language set up, but if you had multiple, you'd be able to know which language they participated in, or at least started it in. And then here we have the first question, which is basically consent, yes, no. So what you can see is that it also has created lines of data for all the times I previewed it. And this is where you can see under distribution channel, it's like, okay, preview, 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 anonymous. So these were me just kind of giving you the example of how this works. And then this was that time I actually filled it out on my own. And as you can see, it's actually recorded like what, which animal I ranked 1, 2, like the ranking of the animals, my name, the gender I selected. I've got, I skipped birthday, the coach variables, but as you can see here, this is activated, so it's showing us the labels. But if you remove that, you can see that the numerical codes underneath are actually working, which is nice. So we have coach 1 through, 16, plus that extra one I added just as an example of coach care. And then if you go back to the variable view, you can actually see that it's added all these labels by default. So sometimes it's better just to kind of delete these because they're really long. So my preference usually is to just remove those. But you can see that it's already recoded here that these correspond exactly as I had them in the survey. And essentially, the one thing to note is that the string variable, birthday is in a string variable because we let it have that option of being day, month, year. So another option is in Qualtrics is to just ask month as its own question, day as its own question, and year as its own question as well. But essentially, this is how you would export it to SPSS and make sure that everything worked and it looked okay. So that covers kind of a brief overview of how to use Qualtrics. Thank you.